I'm joined now from Sydney by 2GB radio host and voice of the people here on Credlin, Mr Luke Grant.
Hi, Peter.
It's interesting, you know, Luke, I started in the Howard government in 98, so did all of the Howard years, and then we obviously went into opposition and won government again in 2013. And I remember, you know, how demoralised the Liberal Party machine was in 2007 after Mr Howard's loss, but also, you know, I did at least, we really hurt for him because he lost his own seat. That was a humiliation I really thought John Howard didn't deserve.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how quickly people remember those years with affection, and they remember him as being a real standout leader. And I think there's a lot of nostalgia mixed in some of that, but I think the reality is, I think Australians, if they went to the polls, would probably vote for him tomorrow.
You know what? I think that's a fair point. And I wouldn't be surprised if the now Prime Minister hasn't, to some extent, modelled himself on the way that John Howard conducted himself in high office. I listened to an interview he was part of in the last week or two, I think, with Tom Switzer. And he talked about one of the things that he was very keen not to do was play the class game, which of course we saw played by Corbyn in the UK, and to some extent by Bill Shorten at the last federal election here. Now, whether you like his politics or not, there was something uniting about John Howard. And you know what, Peter, I reckon he got the importance many Australians have, or they place, on Australian values, on Australian culture. This idea that you've got to change the language and rip stuff up, you know, that was something that he wasn't persuaded by. It was someone who my listeners tell me when they hear his voice, even now, it's soothing, it's reassuring. I think that says a lot. Yeah.
I agree with the voice point. Every time I hear his voice on radio, I think of better times, to be honest. And I also think he was very comfortable in being ordinary. You know, he'd gone to the state school system. He came out of a small business family. He wasn't embarrassed to be out there in his tracksuit pants. He almost drew strength from the elites and the left in particular, targeting him personally. And I think that's when Australians really started to round in behind him, because he was ordinary. And ordinary is a good thing in our politicians. They can do extraordinary things, but they've got to be of the people. I think that's really important. I want to go to some more current day matters, to Queensland. The Deputy Premier up there has blasted the Morrison government for allowing thousands of visitors into Australia, saying that they're preferencing these overseas visitors ahead of Australians trying to get home. Now, this is the clown that tore up a bill that he owes your Premier in New South Wales. Accuses the Commonwealth of lax border controls. But let's go back to where we were a couple of months ago, because we had cancer victims getting treatment in Sydney, trying to get home to their home in Brisbane or in Queensland. They were locking out their own, but letting the yachties come in and the Hollywood superstars. So this is really rich revisionism from Miles today.
I agree. And let's not forget that poor lady from Canberra who wanted to attend her late father's funeral, coming from a place where for 20 plus days there hadn't been a case and there was no existing case in the ACT. She wanted to hop on a plane and fly to Brisbane. No can do. So it's a bit rich. And all the while, with the borders being closed, 1 minute open the next, we had the Australian taxpayers fronting up with JobKeeper payments, let's not forget, and the Job Seeker supplement. So, look, every state's been well catered for federally and by the other states. New South Wales, it appears, in the last quarter of last year, took more than half of the incoming arrivals. Some of those people were here to visit family for Christmas. They had to go through a process. They were granted approval. Good on them. But for this, as you aptly described him, clown, who was a health minister, referred to as Dr. Miles, you dig a bit deeper, and he's a doctor of, I think, industrial relations, having studied that. He just doesn't like the Conservative governments anywhere. I would reckon he'd be jealous of the way the New South Wales government has dealt with things, and probably, if he was honest, jealous with how well Scott Morrison's dealt with things. And they don't deserve any pity, I think, from anyone. And ripping up the bill, my God, how childish is that?
Well, that's because they're deep in the red ink in Queensland. Jackie Treader left the budget in a pretty parlous state pre-COVID. They've been hit hard again. Yes. And of course, everyone's putting it on Gladys Berejiklian. It's not just the money. The reason why they want her to take the bulk of the overseas arrivals is the only way COVID gets out is it gets out of these hotels. And the only way it gets out of the hotels is because we're importing it in. Now, if we want Australians to come home, we've got to accept there's a level of risk with that. But they all want her to take the risk because if it gets out in New South Wales, it's her problem, not theirs. But they also don't trust their contact tracing systems. They know hers is world class and she backs herself in. So she's taking the lion's share of the numbers. They're still not taking people back in Victoria. And today the NT will go from, on the back of this announcement, 850 arrivals up to 2,000 in capacity in Howard Springs. But this will be the challenge. Borders aren't going to open anytime soon internationally. We're still going to have to bring people home. Is there an argument that all the states have to do more beyond New South Wales?
Well, yeah, of course there is. And you know what? Northern Territory, I think I heard the Chief Minister say responsible for 1% of the country, about to take 15% of arrivals. You know, I think New South Wales has, and not every other Premier has enjoyed this, has received high praise from all sectors, but we shouldn't forget what's happened in the north, and good on them. And good on the government of different persuasions, the coalition federal government and the Labor Northern Territory government, coming together to find a solution. You know, there is something in that a Premier and a Prime Minister, even though they mightn't be on the same side, can find some common ground. So I think we forget the role they're playing in this, and well done. But, you know, Victoria, I don't know how many days it's been exactly since the last local infection, but what gets me is you see the typical lefties in the ALP, led generally by Christina Keneally, giving the government the rounds of the kitchen because there's still 40,000 people overseas, even though the original list has grown and grown and grown. Yet they could well pick up the telephone to their mates, Dan, their mates, Stephen and Anastasia, and of course Mark McGowan in the West, and say, oi, any chance we could do a bit more here? And they are reluctant to do that. So this again, sadly, is all politics. Well done, Gladys Berejiklian, when there's a problem, hand in the air, and then they fix it. Well done to the Northern Territory, but I think Daniel Andrews needs to just step up to the plate here a little bit and take more returning Australians. And that would solve a lot of issues, I reckon.
I'll tell you what, if Christina Keneally was prepared to criticise a Labor Premier, I'd lead the news with it on my show next week. So there you go, Christina.
I'll be
Knock yourself out and put the partisanship to one side.